After a disappointing Phase 4 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and a disastrous start to Phase 5 with the flop that was Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumanium, there was a lot riding on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 with a massive production budget and a ton of hype and build-up to this conclusion for James Gunn. The last hurrah for so many of these characters. All eyes were focused on the box office, and despite the mainstream media headlines that we saw over the weekend, there's really no doubt about it. When you look at what this movie was projected to do just a few weeks ago compared to what it did, it's a little bit disappointing. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 kicks off summer with a slightly disappointing $114 million domestically. Now, that number did rise when we finally got the full Sunday picture, $118 million. But there's not a lot of people that expected this movie to be behind Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2's opening. There's not a lot of people that thought this is a movie that would open up trailing Thor: Love and Thunder, not just domestically, but also at the global box office. A movie that was also a disappointment for the MCU. But here we are, and in fact, this movie sets a record that they really didn't want. Guardians Volume 2 opens to lower box office than any Disney first of summer Marvel movie ever. Now, what that means is this time frame, end of April, beginning of May, Marvel has released a movie in this time slot every year for like a decade or more. Now, a lot of those, to be fair to Guardians 3, is Infinity War, Endgame, Avengers Age of Ultron, right? Things like that. But you also have, say, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 in there. You also have Doctor Strange, Multiverse of Madness. You have some other things like that that might have been sequels or even threequels in some cases that did way better than Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. This is the lowest one they've had. And when you factor in everything, when you factor in the budget, when you factor in what this movie has to do, it really will all come down to this hold, not just for the second weekend, but even further on. For Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, it's all about box office staying power. And I'll say this movie is probably the best Marvel movie we've seen in a long time. It has good word of mouth compared to what we've seen lately. So I don't think the box office drop is going to be as severe as what we saw with Thor: Love and Thunder or Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumanium. But right now, all eyes are on how this movie tracks. And at least today, what we know from the Monday box office was Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 had the lowest Monday of any Guardians movie we've ever seen. Guardians of the Galaxy scored $8.2 million on Monday. Pretty good until you can compare it to what came before. In fact, that's the lowest first Monday gross of the franchise. Volume 2 was at almost $10 million, and Volume 1 was at $11.7 million. Now, that was probably when kids were not in school. If I had to guess, that might be one of the reasons that one was so much higher. But even when you compare that, when you compare what we just saw for Guardians Volume 3, minus 72% drop, just under $9 million on a Monday. Compare that to something like Doctor Strange, which only had a 65% drop, same time frame. Thor: Love and Thunder had a 63% drop. This was released a little bit later in the summer, so maybe kids being out of school could have had an effect on that. But these are numbers that people are going to pay a lot of attention to going forward because Thor: Love and Thunder, that's the number that Guardians of the Galaxy needs to match just to be profitable, and we'll get into why that's the case. It's hard to knock a film that opened above $100 million, yet analysts were expecting a stronger start for Volume 3 because it's the last of Marvel's legacy tentpoles, and because its predecessor, Guardians Volume 2, enjoyed a much bigger $146 million debut. The downturn is not a problem as long as audiences keep showing up. The issue is the pandemic-era films in Disney's MCU have suffered from a momentum problem at the box office. Recent installments started strong, only to quickly run out of steam. This is what we've talked about with the MCU. For the past year, I feel like the headlines have all been the same. Oh, incredible start. And then it drops way off in the second weekend. That's what we've been talking about. I don't think we're going to see the same level drop for this movie. I think we're probably going to see somewhere in the realm of a 60% drop as opposed to a 70% like we saw with Ant-Man, because I do think word of mouth is better for this than it has been for some of these other things. Ticket sales for Paul Rudd's third standalone adventure cratered by 70% in its second weekend, continue a worrying trend from Doctor Strange down 67% and Thor: Love and Thunder down almost 68%. It would be alarming for Guardians to suffer the same fate because it would reinforce the narrative the MCU is struggling to maintain its A-list box office franchise. They talk about how $100 million for most other movies would be considered amazing opening weekends. Not exactly the same for the MCU because these movies have such massive budgets. Marvel movies are held to higher standards. That's in part because they're expensive to make and market. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 cost $250 million to produce and roughly $100 million to promote. I want to stick on that $100 million to promote number because there's no way that that's real. It's higher than that. I can almost guarantee you. $250 million production budget, but the marketing, let's go back to what they told us. I want to go back to what they said almost a year ago for Thor: Love and Thunder. This movie cost $250 million to produce and $100 million to promote. No, when Disney came out and told us the numbers, it was actually $160 million in promotion and ads. Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, $150 million in promotion and ads. Disney won't tell us probably for months and months and months what they actually spent, but it's probably more in that realm, $150 million, than it is to $100 million. The most conservative estimate would be $125 million. And with that, you would still need to have about $750 million at the box office just to break even. Because again, the theaters keep about half that cut when you're averaging here domestically, internationally, all of that stuff. You got a massive Chinese box office. That's a different story altogether because they keep almost all of the money from their theaters over there. But regardless, that $100 million is likely a very low estimate based off what we've seen from the MCU in recent years. So $750, $800 million, these are the numbers, the range that is probably in the break-even scenario. Right now, if I were betting, I would say it's probably going to end up in that 750 range, maybe up to potentially right under 800 based on how it's tracking, but everything's going to come down to this second weekend at the box office. You can't really argue around it. This opening weekend, people expected it to be much better. They expected it to outpace Thor: Love and Thunder. They expected the domestic to outpace the one that came out back in 2017. And when you adjust for inflation, this is the weakest Guardians opening in history. But will it do well enough? Will it have a good enough audience score to continue bringing people to the theater week after week? Time will tell. We'll definitely let you know as soon as we know more. What do you think about this? Overall, I think that this weak box office opening, even for a good movie, which I do think is a good movie, it just tells you how much damage Marvel has done to their brand when they couldn't even convince their fan base to come out on opening weekend for something that actually was good because they've been burned too many times before. Let me know your thoughts about all this in the comments section below. Smash a like button, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell for notifications, share this video out there, and I'll talk to you later.